Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Self Published Success, a show that highlights forward thinking authors who chose self publishing over traditional and found success in doing so. My name is John Feldman, founder and CEO of Visionary Literary, and your host for today's show. Our guest today is Joseph M. Lenard. Joseph is a former IT professional turned author of the political thriller Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you, which became an Amazon bestseller during its release. He's also a blogger, speaker, vlogger, and the holder of 24 copyrighted works. And fun fact, Joseph was also the winner of a radio contest in the 1980s with his radio play, The Adventures of Detective Idol, based upon the Billy Idol song, Eyes Without a Face. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity because being, gone through this process, I'm very eager to not just sell my book, Terror Strikes Coming Soon to a City Near You, but to aid others who are looking to potentially release a manuscript.
Good. Then you are in the perfect place because we like to talk about books and we like to talk about the advantages of self-publishing. So let's open up by kind of piggyback a bit there off of what I introduced, right? And just tell us a little bit more about you, about your background, kind of what led you into writing your book.
Well, what you didn't say in the bio is that I've been writing pretty much my whole life since like grade school.
Okay.
You'd mentioned the 24 copyrights, so I mean that kind of hints at that. But uh, so I'd always been striving towards releasing something that I could hang my hat on as a legacy and feel good enough about to ask somebody for $20 to buy my product because books are ridiculously expensive. Everything's ridiculously expensive nowadays,
Yeah.
but books have gotten pretty darn expensive. So if I'm going to ask you for $20, I wanted to make sure I had a good piece because I actually started writing this book in 2006.
Wow.
So there's a whole lot of research, a whole lot of revisioning going on in this process to get something that I felt proud enough about and, it fair enough to ask you to lay out your cash to purchase. And while it's on terrorism as the main theme, there are a lot of sub themes. This is not a shoot 'em up, blood and guts kind of book. It's not, it's an intellectual pursuit book with a lot of sub themes, including PTSD and suicide, because survivor guilt is a real thing. So there's a lot goes on in this book. It's not just about terrorism. It's for everybody, not just, you know, crime and punishment enthusiasts uh, with the terrorist angle.
Good. Good. Glad to hear it. So really what struck me and what would strike anyone is again that you started this book so long ago, and so that there are two things here, right? One, I want to know how you had the patience to do that, and two, sort of like a question 1.5 here is, especially in an age now, right, especially in the last few years where self-publishing has become so accessible, right, and so easy. Like, how did you not hit a point where you're like, okay, I can have this thing up and running in a week on Amazon. Let's just do it. Like, how did you reel back from that and really just focus on making a perfect book?
Yeah. Well, regarding the time frame, uh, the book actually, the opening came to me in a dream,
Okay.
as really most of my writings have and do. They come to me in a dream, and I say, okay, that's something to write about. And this came to me the opening came to me in a dream, even though they say never open a book this way.
Yeah.
I took the creative writing formulaic guidelines and put them through the shredder. I'm not going to be like 99.999% of all other authors. This book is, I'm different. This book is different than anything else you've ever read. I break the rules because I want to give you something different. If you want cookie cutter, there's a bunch of cookie cutter writers out there, right?
Right.
Which is another reason why a traditional publisher wouldn't want to touch me. They want the cookie cutter. We could sell 1 million copies of these with our eyes closed.
Yep.
So, and it just didn't quite all come together, but now is the right time because people seem to be under this delusion that terrorism somehow evaporated and went away, and terrorists all decided to put down their guns and stop killing because of the Wuhan virus. That's not the case. You just didn't hear the stories because they were focused on the lockdown, stories.
Right.
So, and like I say, there's sub themes. General crime is on the rise, so that's an issue in the book too. So now was the time. So, yeah, I didn't want to rush it, and I'm glad I didn't for these reasons.
Good. Good. And then I'm sure that within those, 14, 16 years, whatever it was that you took, right? But you were still slowly working on it, perfecting it, getting it to a place where you knew, because as someone who, like you said, you've been writing since you were a child, right? So you know that first drafts are not final drafts and that the process is very iterative, right?
Yeah.
So when did it strike you that you were like, okay, like I'm ready? Like what was that feeling like when you thought, okay, this is actually ready for the world?
Yeah, and you're using the right term there, since terror strikes is the name of the book. Strike is, of course, the right term. Well, I also want to throw in my dad was uh, a musician.
Okay.
He founded the Polka Kings. They released 3 albums and some vinyl singles. Uh, and his dad before him had a polka band too. So the creative gene was in me. Uh, so I've always felt the urge to, say, hey, Dad, you've had albums. I've got a published book.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm going on little sleep now, so I've lost my train of thought from what your actual question was. Did that come anywhere close to answering it?
A little bit. That's totally fine though. So I think I just wanted to know, like, when mentally, when you thought, okay, this manuscript that I've been working on for so long, like, I think it's ready.
I'm glad you said that, because you also said these things, to be good, need to go through many iterations.
Right.
So let me say this to you budding authors: a book is never finished. Never.
Yeah.
There has to come a point where you say, okay, now it's the time to publish this, because you will always think of things you could say differently, potentially better. You remove this, add that, changing sentence structures. There's always things that you could change to maybe make it a better thing.
Yeah.
But you have to eventually give yourself a deadline. Okay. And I did that.
Yeah.
In 2021, I approached Lumify and Dorrance, and we'll talk about them a little later, with the book draft as I had it. And I eventually decided to sign with Lumify, and January 2022 was the deadline for the final the final rough draft. Then, of course, it goes through the editing process where the editor checks your grammar and things. And we had a bit of a dust up over that, because an editor is usually in the traditional Oxford English
Yeah.
uppity, uppity, proper King's speech
Yeah.
style. And I said, no, some of these things are going to stay the way they're said because they're meant to. They
Yeah.
don't take into account regional dialects at times and, colloquialisms. So feel free to push back against your editor if you have a certain flavor and style you're going for in your book.
Yeah.
But obviously, an editor will clean up some of the grammar and the run on sentences and provide some suggested alternatives. But 99% of every word in this book is mine. I did, of course, adapt a few minor changes here and there, like sentence structure things that they
Right.
said, this would really be better.
Right. And so it's one thing that we said a little bit ago was that it's an iterative process, but writing a book is also a collaborative process, right? So
Yeah,
it's you, your
it
editor,
really is.
your beta
You
readers. Yeah.
do not, do not. Well, the general rule is you should not be your own editor. If you're going to go with the lower end self publishing, and I want to discuss the difference between a self publishing firm and a uh, assisted publishing firm, there's a major difference.
Right.
Now, if you're going with the lower end self publishing firms, you at least get friends and family, but they may not want to really be critical
Yeah.
to edit your book.
Yep.
You cannot be the sole editor of your book. Things won't be right. There will be mistakes. And even Stephen King books, with the money he's got and probably edited professionally by several editors,
Yep.
can still end up with a mistake. And I did catch a mistake in my book the other day. We were quoting on Instagram, and the word whole, WHOLE, somehow landed up HOLE. Well, when you read the sentence, you know what it means,
Yeah.
but the wrong word is there.
Yeah.
And that got by me and the editors and all my family and friends who
Yep.
read it. So
Yep. It's funny. I'm recording my an audiobook for my most recent one, and today I found a spelling error, and I had several editors read it, several beta readers, and everyone. I was like, how in the world did this get missed? But
plus
um,
the obvious word spell checker, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
again, WHLE and HOLE are both spelled correctly. It's
yep,
just the wrong word.
yeah,
And also the grammar checker AI isn't smart enough
mm,
to catch, wait a minute, that thought isn't grammatically correct.
yeah, yeah. So when it comes to editing, right? So what you said is that you want to distinguish the lower end self publishing versus the assisted publishing. So
Yeah.
tell the listeners what's the difference there.
Yeah. And I don't want to discourage anyone from publishing. Now, like if you've got a family memoir, family legacy book, that's for you, your friends, and your family. You're going to publish it, and you're only going to put out and sell 100 copies, or even buy all the copies yourself to give away. A lower end publication like an Outskirts, and I mention them. I'm not trying to denigrate them. I looked into them. They're a good firm, or looking at what you offer. Uh, would be in the higher end too. But the burden is on you. The font choices are all on you. The layout, the spacing, it's all on you. You've got to be where you want it to be. But if you want a Harper's Collins level quality book, you've got to go to the higher end assisted publishing firms. And I looked at both Dorrance, as my friend Bruce Fleury, who wrote the Negro Project. is through assisted publishing Dorrance, and my friend Pat Colbeck, who wrote Wrestling Gators, is through Illumify, and I signed with Illumify eventually because they have former HarperCollins employees working for them, and as you can kind of see, my that's part of my book cover is my background. I had a very elaborate cover design that I wanted. Uh, they talked me out of it. Some aspects are in my cover, but we could go into the cover stuff maybe a little more if we have time later. But higher end outfits, you've got more leeway, and you're dealing with like with outskirts, they give you a template, and you just they give you sample covers, and basically you pick a font for your title and your name, but it's very limited.
Right.
With the higher end publishing, you get full art backing and the cover that you need. And I'm sorry, but the old adage, don't judge a book by its cover, is complete bull. You know what?
Sure is. Sure is.
People do judge your book by its cover
Yes, they do.
before they then turn it over to then read what you say on the back,
Yeah.
to then maybe decide to flip through it to see how good it looks on the inside. Then they will consider buying it. But
Yeah.
if you don't have a catchy cover, nobody's looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what we do with our authors is we tell them cover design is first. That's the eye catcher. Then it's the title, then subtitle if you have one, and then it's the description. So it goes in that order. That's the order that potential readers are looking. So yes, very very different. And because publishing and self-publishing is becoming so vastly attainable for anyone, there are so many different options. And like you were saying, the lower level option for anyone listening who is, their budget is very low for the project, it doesn't mean you can't get a book out there. But if
Right.
you do, if time is of the essence and if you do need help and assistance, then companies like the ones you mentioned or our company, like we go in and we do full ghostwriting, editing, cover design, and so forth. So but again, there are so many different levels and so many in between those two that you can choose. So,
Yeah. One of
um,
the things about my cover I wanted to do the traditional, uh, you know, titling there. Uh, but I also wanted Terror Strikes to go down the binding, not the side binding,
yeah,
but on the cover along the edge, so that if you're coming at the book from the side,
Mhm.
the opposite side of the binding, you would still see the title. So there was kind of a gimmick, I thought, that would be beneficial, but I allowed them to talk me out of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Because
you'll
I
never
said
know.
it's going to get too complicated,
Yeah,
and a whole lot of people are traditional. They don't like the new stuff.
yeah, yeah. Trying something new is always risky and scary. And one thing that I do that's kind of catching my attention as we say this, right, is so we're talking about the differences between like assisted publishing and self, and then if we go even further, it's like traditional publishing, right? So with your cover design, you gave away a little bit of that creative freedom, which is okay because you still got the final say. You just believed in what they were telling you. But when it comes to the idea behind your book is conservative in nature, right? So
Yes.
so that's something, and we won't harp on politics here, but that's sort of a divisive subject to write on. So trying to go the traditional route, half of the people who don't agree with that sort of writing would have instantly wrote it off without even reading more of the story or taking into consideration any other aspects. With you, since you decided to self-publish, you had full creative freedom, right? You had an editor helping you with the line edit with grammar and punctuation, but they weren't saying we won't publish if you write this chapter or this paragraph or this character the way they are. So talk a little
Exactly.
bit about that. Um, I guess the reasoning for you to choose self-publishing so that you could have that creative freedom with your writing.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the big reasons to go the self or assisted publishing route. Full creative authority.
Hmm.
No one, like you said, saying, well, we're not going to carry it if you say that. You know, you have full creative authority. And the other thing is the hassle, the old traditional way before self publishing and assisted publishing, you had no choice. Uh, you you wrote like the movie about the crawfish. I can't think of the name of the film that's out now, but she writes. She does an illustrative book on things of the bayou. Uh, Somebody will remember. Again, I'm going on a little sleep, so my brain's a little mushy right now.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry. But the old way was you did a book and you mailed it to dozens of publishers, prayed it didn't get lost in the stack of a bazillion other people who were doing the same.
Yeah.
Somebody actually read your book. It's kind of like music today, too, to pivot a little.
Yeah.
The old way was you had a band, you recorded a tape, you sent it in, prayed somebody listened to it, or you played at the bar, hoped somebody heard you that
Yeah.
had some heft with a record agency
Yeah.
to sign you. The big publishers today, unless if you're a celebrity with immediate name recognition,
Right.
they're not interested.
Right.
They only care about the serial writers, the Pattersons, the Clancys, the Kings, people they know. They've got a series of books that are going to be immediate sequel sales.
Right.
uh, you know, a new publisher, a new author who's not established, you're just wasting your time going that route unless I will add this caveat, you've got a trilogy. And I didn't want to write a trilogy. I
Yeah.
wanted to sell you a book with a story in it that
Yep.
doesn't string you along expecting you to buy two more books.
Yep. Yeah.
But if you've got a story that indeed relates in some form that you can make a trilogy out of it,
Mhm.
uh, and you've got two of them written and you're writing into your third book, you might get their attention because, the first book may not sell so well, but then the second book helps build, and a third, you've got an established uh, line of thought, a little bit more credibility
Right.
than whereas like with me with 24 copyrights, uh, I've got credibility to those who to know that and who have seen some of those other works that weren't officially traditionally published, but the first book is an uphill battle.
Right. So speaking of this, right? So as we begin to wrap up here, right? Speaking of a second book, I know you don't have a trilogy, right? But
Yeah.
speaking of a next book for you or next steps or what's down the line for you and then where can people find you?
Yeah, well, first let's deal with the latter. I've got two sites. The book has a site, terrorstrikes.info. Now, I wanted .book, but that extension is in the works. It's not available yet. Not .com, terrorstrikes.info. That's the book site. I also have an author site, josephmleonard.us. Now, there's no O in Leonard. It looks like Lenard, but it's not French. It's josephmleonard.us. And you can contact me with the contact tab through either of those sites about the book or about publishing, whatever. Feel free to contact me. Uh, what was the first part?
Yeah.
Oh, another book.
Yep.
Uh, like I said, I'm unlike any author you've ever read. There's also, you've heard of a book within a book. People traditionally use that method. This book has that. My character, Martin, is writing a book called Terrorist Tracks. So my book, Terror Strikes, is about him writing his book about terrorism
Interesting.
to provide the story. But unlike any other author on the planet, we are in the internet age, and I'm a former IT guy, as you mentioned at the top.
Mhm.
There's also blog within a book. And again, the publisher was, ah,
Yeah.
I said, no, this has to be there
Yep.
as part of the story. It's part of the character development of my character and tells about a, repurposed blogs that I wrote to my character about 9/11, which is obviously the biggest chapter in the book on terrorism.
Hmm.
And also another opportunity, but also, unlike other authors who want to put together a sequel or a trilogy, my next book that I'm working on. I can't tell you the title because it'll give too much away, but it is not a sequel, but it does have a tie in to this book. In this book, you will find a letter to the editor, something else you normally don't see in a book, from a person. And my next book is based upon his life. And that letter expounds into the next book. So there is a tie in, but not a sequel. I
Excellent.
aim to be different. So if you're looking for different, my book is your book.
Excellent. Well, now we know where to find it because you let us know. And for the listeners, I will also put a link inside of the show description. Um, Joseph, this has been an excellent conversation. So much value based on the self-publishing route. Truly appreciate you taking the time to speak with the listeners, speak with us about your experiences and what can be most beneficial for those listening. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you. Take care.